Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at historical moments that caused widespread fear and panic.
My last day at work was March 31st. So I haven't worked since then, and I don't have any insurance.
Orson Welles' War of the Worlds.
I still meet people all over the place, everywhere in the world, who've had experiences, bitter or otherwise, as a result of our little experiment in broadcasting.
This infamous example of mass hysteria might be slightly exaggerated, but it's too classic to exclude. The Halloween radio broadcast of the Mercury Theater on the Air featured an adaptation of H.G. Wells's science fiction novel, The War of the Worlds, narrated by Orson Welles. The story was adapted in a news broadcast style, giving the impression to some listeners that Martian aliens were actually invading Earth.
I swallowed the whole thing as it came over the air, like a new national emergency or something.
With global tensions rising in the lead up to World War II, it's understandable that some anxious listeners, having missed the introductory disclaimer of the program's fictional content, would panic and call the radio station and local police en masse. The following day brought newspaper coverage of the incident, but it's up to you whether you believe the anecdotal stories they reported.
For the next several hours, newspapers, radio stations, and police precincts from coast to coast would be swamped with calls.
Well, I can't help that, ma'am. We just don't know anything about it.
Y2K.
I'm going to go and get my gas tank filled for my outdoor barbecue. So you can be assured nothing's going to go wrong because I'm ready.
To those too young to remember the turn of the millennium, Y2K might refer to a vintage-inspired clothing trend. But to those of us a little older, it's a reminder of an uncertain time that had many in a panic. Why? Because computers represented years using only the last two digits, leaving many to fear mass computer errors if 00 was interpreted as 1900 instead of 2000.
It's a serious problem. We're taking it very seriously, and we're doing everything that we feel is appropriate and prudent to be Y2K ready.
Fearing the glitch might affect infrastructure in a disastrous way, many spent their New Year's Eves stocking up on emergency supplies and hunkering down at home. This fear was, thankfully, unfounded, as only a few minor errors actually occurred, like a $7,000 late fee for a video rental that showed as 100 years overdue.
Look at that. Everyone out there ready to party, and I was just sitting here, worrying about the hangover.
Yellow fever.
Yellow fever was horrible. The patient is spraying black vomit across the room. They're in agony. They're screaming.
Considered one of the most dangerous diseases of the 18th and 19th centuries, yellow fever swept through the Americas, Africa, and Europe throughout several epidemic periods. Notably deadly outbreaks included Shreveport, Louisiana in 1873, when 1,200 people lost their lives over 80 days. And an 1878 outbreak in the Mississippi River Valley that killed 20,000.
Philadelphians were used to epidemic disease outbreak. Diphtheria, cholera, smallpox, measles. But this case was different. It hit Philadelphians with a force that they hadn't seen before.
Understandably, an outbreak of yellow fever was enough to make any community panic, but the panic was magnified by the uncertainty surrounding the disease. Without an understanding of how the disease was spread, it seemed impossible to slow infections. Thankfully, further research had led to a greater knowledge of the disease, and a vaccine was developed in the 1930s that is still in use today.
In the face of this yellow fever epidemic, he's trying out new ideas and really attempting to take a scientific approach with knowledge that he'd acquired in Europe.
Indian Ocean Tsunami.
Homes were torn apart, huts and shacks reduced to nothing more than floating debris. Cars, boats, and even buses were picked up and tossed around like children's toys.
When a 9.2 magnitude undersea earthquake struck the Indian Ocean, no one could have prevented the devastation that would follow. The earthquake caused a massive tsunami, with waves as high as 100 feet, striking the shores of 14 countries, killing over 200,000 people. The tragedy was especially devastating due to the lack of tsunami warning systems in place.
1,300 had died on this small island in a matter of minutes. The destruction I witnessed in Indonesia was on an almost unimaginable scale.
The victims were caught completely by surprise, though some populations recognized the signs of an imminent tsunami and evacuated safely. Far too many had to experience the terrifying sight described by some witnesses as a black giant and a wall of water. Chernobyl.
We have to keep water flowing into the core. We need electricians, mechanics, we need bodies. How many times do I have to say it?
In 1986, a disastrous explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Soviet Union released harmful radioactive material into the atmosphere that spread across much of Europe. Within hours, individuals in nearby cities began to fall ill. But it wasn't until the radiation set off alarms hundreds of miles away in Sweden that the USSR admitted that the accident had occurred.
Although experts say radiation levels in Sweden are not harmful, and in fact are falling, many people are not convinced.
I'm concerned, yes. I'm worried about what's going to happen if the wind turns around back more to Sweden.
The scale of the disaster and the delayed announcement caused the millions of affected people across Europe to worry about the potential risks to public health and the environment. The disaster was speculated to cause widespread deaths and birth defects, but thankfully, the impact on public health, while still significant, was much smaller than anticipated.
The control rods in those channels can move no further. The graphite tips are fixed in position, endlessly accelerating the reaction. Chernobyl Reactor 4 is now a nuclear bomb.
The AIDS epidemic.
It was back in April that the Greater New York Blood Program began testing all donated blood with a special screening test for the AIDS virus. The test cannot determine if someone has the disease, but they can tell if they've been exposed to it.
In the early 1980s, an illness began spreading in the United States, but was first noticed in LGBTQ communities. AIDS, a life-threatening condition caused by HIV, killed millions of people in the 1980s and 90s when the epidemic was at its height, with gay men being the population most devastatingly affected. Public fears and panic surrounding the illness triggered widespread stigmatization, isolation, and marginalization of LGBTQ populations.
And if something's out there that can help me and save my life, I think I should be eligible for it, no matter what the dollar costs.
Though today there are advanced treatments for HIV, and we have a better public understanding of the illness, the epidemic at its height was a time of tragic loss for the LGBTQ community that increased homophobic incidents and severely hampered civil rights efforts.
In 1995, a combo therapy known as the AIDS cocktail was ushered in, followed by even better medications offering hope. But there was no cure for the stigma.
COVID-19 pandemic.
In influenza, we talk about droplet transmission. One droplet may be about 10,000, 50,000 copies. In COVID-19, you have billions of copies inside the same droplet.
100 years after another viral pandemic brought the world to a halt, we got a new one. The COVID-19 pandemic, beginning in early 2020, triggered lockdowns that kept most of us confined to our homes and glued to our screens. Uncertainty about the disease early in the pandemic resulted in misinformation that spread rapidly across social media, with some promoting dangerous and harmful quote-unquote advice to millions.
Meanwhile, the USA records more than 200,000 infections in one day. Never in recent history has such hope been pinned on a vaccine.
As the pandemic dragged on, we knew more but grew increasingly tired of quarantines, resulting in further pushback and outrage from the public against government restrictions. We're still evaluating all the ways COVID has affected our lives, but the pandemic's wide reach ensured no individual was left untouched by the global pandemic.
We love going around telling other people what to do. We like to say, look at us, this is the society, right? This is peak civilization. We're wearing garbage bags as PPE. That's embarrassing.
The Black Death.
At that point, none of them knew that they were suffering from the most devastating disease in history, bubonic plague.
The Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, caused tens of millions of deaths and may have killed half the population of Europe at the time. Very little was known at the time about the disease's origins and methods of transmission, but poor hygiene practices ensured the plague's broad, disastrous effects.
700 years ago, fleas and rats were everywhere. They were part of daily life, and no one connected them to the disease so no attempt was made to stop them.
Scholars at the time stated the disease was caused by the alignment of planets, or sent by God to punish non-believers and reward the faithful. The fear and uncertainty surrounding the Black Death caused many to seriously reckon with their spiritual beliefs, which some scholars say helped trigger the Renaissance in Italy.
Few escape with the death of but one or two. Never did so many husbands and wives die together. Never did so many parents carry their children with them to the grave.
Cuban Missile Crisis.
A quarantine prevents any more missiles from reaching Cuba, but it doesn't remove the missiles already there. It gives the Soviets a chance to pull back without a war.
When Soviet missiles aimed at the United States were discovered in Cuba, what followed was the most tension-filled, near-disastrous 13 days in American history. Maps demonstrating the missiles' range showed nearly all of the United States in the affected zone, causing fear and panic in the American public that a Soviet attack was imminent.
They don't tell you the truth. They tell you to put your hands behind your neck and they keep building bombs.
Tense negotiations between the United States and the Soviet Union resulted in a compromise that satisfied both parties and removed the offending weapons, inspiring a breath of relief in the American people. Though it nearly escalated into a full-scale nuclear war, the negotiations of the Cuban Missile Crisis led to more effective communications between the White House and the Kremlin in order to prevent a similar crisis from occurring in the future.
Khrushchev knew that he was losing control of events in Cuba. He was also told that Kennedy was under severe pressure from the military to act. If another U.S. plane were shot down, it might trigger a clash neither wanted.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into Settings and switch on your notifications. September 11th.
Whether it takes 4, 6, 10 hours to get home tonight, no one here was really complaining or counting the hours. They were instead counting their blessings.
In 2001, the world watched in horror as the United States experienced the most deadly terrorist attack in history. 4 planes, hijacked by members of the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, crashed into both World Trade Center towers, the Pentagon, and a field in Pennsylvania, resulting in thousands of lives lost.
More than 19,000 human remains have been collected. Families have the option of being notified once at the end, or being told every time a DNA match is made.
The attacks were broadcast live around the world to millions of shocked viewers, promoting fears of subsequent attacks across the United States and the world. Since the devastating attacks, there's been a lasting, heightened sense of fear surrounding terrorism in the United States. The shock of the incident and impact on the public ensured this event will not be forgotten in the eyes of the American people.
Thousands of people in there, Patty. Where the hell are they?
It's understandable that incidents like these would inspire strong reactions. Do you agree with our list? Share your thoughts in the comments. Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.